Introduction to Meditation, Session 5, and today's topic is frequencies of the brain. This is February 9th, 2017 at Dalhousie University, room B400. Well, we've covered 4 different areas up to this point. We're at Session 5, and in Session 1, we looked at some of the concepts and perceptions about meditation, about reality, really. And then in Session 2, we looked at what Western science has figured out in terms of body, mind, and energy connections. In Session 3, we looked at relaxation and realized that it was a combination of 2 separate nervous systems, and using Eastern philosophy or Eastern medical approach, it's actually 4 different conditions that you have to monitor, or they monitor. And then last week we looked at left and right brain balance and how we could use exercise, food, and meditation to help improve the balance. So, frequencies of the brain, we'll spend the first 20 minutes doing our guided meditation today. We're going to be a little bit different. We're going to do some Qigong, some energy work. And then we'll take about the following 20 minutes to go into the topic, focusing mainly on the 4 categories of brainwave frequencies that most people look at. There are others, but we'll look at these 4. And something called cerebral lateralization, and a technique called binaural beats. And then we'll do our detachment meditation. Just again, a reminder about the resources. A little note about the online presentations that are available. They're more like notes. So if there's anything in any of the presentations you want to review or look into deeper, you can go back to the video and just fast forward to that section and review it. And all of the handouts are there, so you can just copy them. I have a new resource for you today. It's a book I published a few years ago, and it embodies all of the principles and more that I've been talking about here. If you go to smashwords.com, you'll be able to download the first part of the book for free, and chapter 1 is on meditation. I also have the book available in hard copy, and if anyone is interested in that, they can, chat to me at the end of the class or drop me a note. So we're still getting great feedback from everyone in the class, and I kept them in the same 4 general categories. The grounding little feedbacks I've been getting, people seem to be moving along quite well, and it's not unnormal or unusual to have moments when a meditation is difficult, or it's challenging, and that is an indicator that maybe you should look at that as a possible area for growth. Just a thought. It is for me. Whenever I'm having a challenge with any of this kind of work, it's usually a flag that it's something I have to work on. Something came up regarding postures, interest in being able to do some kind of exercises for people who work at a desk all day. And in fact, we'll be doing that today when we go into the Qigong energy work. I have more information about waking someone who is sleepwalking, and I'll talk to that later on. Overall comments are fantastic. One that was more of a comment in the last class, and this has come up in some of the other notes as well in previous sessions. How do I measure my progress? Am I doing okay? Now, this is a really great question because it goes right to the heart of the matter in terms of who is responsible for my reality. Am I totally responsible? I'll be digging into this much deeper, but at this point, just want to stop for 1 second and just ponder about how much we really have control over in our world, in our reality. Most of what we experience, we have no control over. The only thing that we have ultimate control over is how we react, how we think. But everything else just seems to be happening around us. We can influence it to some degree. So in terms of measuring the result, one thing you can do is keep a good journal. So you need to be able to note that if you set for and do a meditation for a period of time, see how you feel afterwards. Make a note of it. We'll be going into that in much more greater detail, but it's a great question. Don't let go of it, and I will be addressing it as we move along. Some interest in something called a walking meditation. That's the term I use. We'll do one of these near the end of the session, so we'll be able to give you an experience of interactive meditation. But there's a lot of different ways of a walking meditation. One example is the color meditation. I sometimes do that when I'm walking or driving. I go through the rainbow, and while I'm driving, I just notice if there are red elements around me, and then if there's yellow and green and so on. And that has a calming effect. Question about where I can study Qigong. Well, obviously right here, but also you could start at the Nova Scotia Tai Chi and Meditation Association. You can register there. It's free, and classes are held weekly and monthly there. Question about resources on campus. We'll have to defer to your Employee Health and Wellness website. I'll talk with Janice and to see if there's specifically things that we can look at in terms of meditation. But I think there are resources, just a question of whether they are the ones you need. But we'll look into that. Again, great comments. Just a quick review of the two handouts I gave last day. We have one on the meridians. Just going to make another little point. I made the point that notice that there are 12 meridians, 12 on each side of the body, even though this graphic here only shows 6 on one side and 6 on the other. Please notice that there's a division between the meridians. The ones on the legs are different than the ones in the arms. Also notice that the yin meridians, which are on the left side of this graphic, are what we would call the interior sides of the arm and leg, and the yang meridians would be on the exterior or outside of the arms and legs. Just a little note, and maybe I'll try to do that in the next class as well. In terms of the food chart, one thing I would like to point out there is that things like coffee, alcohol, drugs, and chemicals are on the extreme yin. And that actually caught me by surprise when I was taking the time to look at this. Things that I would automatically think would be yang, such as coffee, actually have a yin effect on the body. Okay, some terms that we will be looking at today, terms and concepts. We'll obviously be talking about frequencies, and I have to take a little bit of time and talk about cycles and phases and just sort of make sure that everyone understands what a wave frequency is, because that's the topic today. And it's not difficult, but not knowing it can cause some confusion in the terms. And as I said, we'll be looking at the major grouping of brainwave frequencies: beta, alpha, theta, and delta. Now for the guided meditation, we're going to do something called shadow exercise. And this is a traditional form of meditation involving kinesthetic movement. Up to this point, I've given you guided meditations using my voice, using my words, and my inflections. Today we're going to do a guided meditation, but you're going to physically follow me. So we're going to be working with your kinesthetic mode of thinking. And the exercise that I'm going to show you is called full brain movement, something I'm developing to address the issue that learning some of these ancient moves is very difficult because we don't have the vocabulary. So this full brain exercise program will begin to provide the alphabet such that you can put together words. Now, I call Qigong energy work, so it's a global term. Even though what we will be doing today will be moving, but what we're trying to do is to help you develop an awareness of where the power positions are. Just like we would do in Kung Fu or Tai Chi, you're moving from one power position to the next. We use a sequencing in doing these exercises. We do it unilateral, which is one side at a time. Then we do it bilateral, both sides. Then I do something which will trigger the corpus callosum, which is we do it bilateral mirrored. So the two brains have to sync up, and you'll get to experience that. Again, the three qualities in the movements. Using the body has to be accurate. Using our energy, it's soft energy and slow moving energy. And then using our spirit, our mind, we want to visualize what we're doing. So we need all three components in there. Okay, well, let's do some of the full brain movements now. I went online and looked at a definition of brain waves. Even though the topic is frequencies of the brain, we're really talking brain waves. So it's interesting, what I found was that a definition that described brain waves as a rhythmic fluctuations of voltage between parts of the brain, resulting in the flow of electric current. And to be a current produced by brain waves. So we're talking about a number of things here. We're talking about a rhythmic movement. We're talking about actual voltage or electricity. And something that is interesting, a current. So a current flows between things. So it goes from one point to another. And this will come in important later. One of the areas where we talk about this current flowing is in terms of balancing in the brain. But one of the issues that I hope to point out that we can address through meditation is something called cerebral lateralization. And we looked at that when we talked about the left and right brain. But we'll be talking about it again today, but in terms of frequencies. You should have the same roughly frequencies throughout the whole brain, but the three bodies can get injured. Now, the physical body can get injured, and there is a classic example of our hockey player, Mr. Crosby, who got a brain injury early in his career, and that caused a dramatic lateralization of his brain. So physical injury, another good example of a physical body injury that will cause lateralization that most of us may have seen, is a stroke. So if you get a stroke, it actually prevents the frequencies being generated on both sides of the brain, and that's visible in the person's behavior. In terms of the energy body, different foods affect the brain differently, and some foods can cause dramatic changes in the flow of energy in the brain. One example is coffee. Another example is something like a fruit, an orange, or something that stimulates the whole brain. So food is fuel, and without proper food and diet, the energy system has a hard time balancing. And of course, the spiritual body can be disrupted through situations like a stressful situation, trauma, emotional trauma, mental trauma. So these three bodies work together, and any one of them can throw off the flow of energy in the brain. in terms of the frequencies. But let's look at these frequencies for a moment. When we talk about frequencies, a good place to start is in a circle. So we have a circle here with a line through it. And one complete round or rotation or circumference of the circle would be called a full cycle. So that's one complete cycle is a circle. But what we do is we cut the circle in half and we roll it out like an S shape. And half of the circle is on the left, the other half is on the right. And notice that there is a difference in position. So the one on the left would be, you could call it positive energy, a plus, and the one on the right could be considered a negative energy or a minus. Typically, they would give it a unit of 1. So the complete two components would be considered say 1 second or 1 unit. The thing here is that we break them up in these two pieces. And you might notice the vertical arrow or line. That is your amplitude. That's how strong the current is. So if you then have these two situations, they can be broken into 4 distinct stages. In the one on the left, we call that the positive one. There's a period of where the wave is increasing, and it increases to the maximum altitude or amplitude. That increase is different than what happens afterwards. It begins to decrease. So there is an increasing component and a decreasing component for both. So that gives us 4 different states. This was noticed thousands of years ago and was encapsulated in the standard yin-yang symbol. If you turn that yin-yang symbol on its side, you have the standard sine curve wave. And in traditional yin-yang theory, this wave has 4 phases, and these are the 4 components that we have to balance when there is a excess or when there is a deficiency in both of the 2 states, the yang and the yin. In this case, you could think of the yang as being the positive energy, the outgoing energy, and the yin being the negative or the incoming energy. And we talked about this in the previous class. Just want you to see this all sort of put together, connected to frequencies. So the 4 main frequencies look like this, where you have the fastest frequency being beta, and beta ranges, as it shows here on the chart, between approximately 13 beats per second to 30 beats per second and higher. This would be considered your normal waking state. So, if you're, doing things around the house or around the job, you would be in that range of between 13 to 30 beats per second. If, however, you have a high stress situation, the number of beats can increase dramatically. And there are physiological changes that take place, and we'll talk about that. But when you begin to relax, you will go into this lower range, alpha, and alpha can be entered into very easily. This is one of the reasons I ask everyone to close their eyes during the meditations in the first introduction to meditation, because the moment you close your eyes, the frequencies of the brain begin to slow down and you produce more of these alpha waves, and they range between 7 and 13. And alpha is associated with pre-sleep, where you're sort of daydreamy or relaxing. The next stage that you would enter into is actual sleep. You start to go into theta, and theta is much slower. It's between 3.5 to 7 hertz, hertz being a beat per second. So when you get down under 7 beats per second, you're in dreamland. And in theta is when you would begin to experience dreams. And again, we'll talk about that later. And when you get really slow, less than 1 beat per second to around 3.5, you're in what they would call delta. And in delta, you're in deep sleep. Now, just to point out here, there was a question about sleepwalking. And I just pulled up this little graph to show that night terrors, sleepwalking, and things along that line typically happen at this stage 4, at the delta stage, when you're in the deepest sleep. And this is kind of important because normally when you're in the delta stage, the body doesn't move. So here you have people doing things when they're in this very, very deep state. The only thing I saw about people walking in their sleep, I did see one pretty practical website that said that you should gently guide the person back to their bed and gently wake them up, because you don't want to leave them. They could get hurt. They could hurt themselves if they're, roaming around. But again, just gently. What I find interesting is that this is a period where normally you don't move. So something's awakening the consciousness of this person, even though physically they're in deep delta. Now, there's a technique called binaural beats. And what this technique, I think it was originally found by some Canadian researchers out west, I believe the University of Winnipeg, found that if they put earphones on subjects, they could induce these lower states of frequencies manually. And the way that works is that they put 2 different frequencies in the ears. So that in this graph you can see they have a tone at around 315 hertz, and on the other ear, the right ear, they have a tone at 325. Now if you subtract the 315 from 325, you get 10 degrees difference. And what will happen is the brain will resolve that difference. The brain that will then produce an internal rhythm of 10, which, as you recall, is alpha. So there are lots of tapes and so on out there for people who want to mechanically set the brain. Now, I'm not suggesting everyone run out and do these binaural beat techniques. I'm just pointing it out so that you can see that the sounds that you're listening to, the music you're listening to, can actually change the frequency inside your brain. Very important to know that. Here's an example of a subject doing the binaural beats, and they have an EEG on them, and you can see the before and after. After, as it says here, 6 minutes of listening, you can see a heavy spike in the 10 megahertz range. Okay, and when you look on the left part of this graphic, you see it's pretty much even all along, but then you see there at around 10 megahertz on the right, there's a big spike in activity. So let's look at sleep, and let's look at brainwave activities again. Here's another graphic that shows the beta, alpha, theta, and delta frequency ranges. But I'd like you to notice something. Here the brighter colors are higher activity and the darker colors are low activity. When the person's in high beta, you can see that it's mostly yellows and greens and reds with no blue. And that makes sense because that's high rapid movement, a lot of activity. The next one to the right there is beta, and you start to see some blue enter in there. That would be your normal waking state. Then it goes to alpha, which is the pre-sleep. Notice that it really dramatically slows down. Again, which is expected. But here's what I think is extremely interesting. When the brainwave frequencies slow down even more and you go into theta, brain activity goes up. So the brain's doing a lot. Same thing even when you go into the very, very low delta frequencies of less than 1 beat per second, the brain activity is significantly more than when you're in alpha. So there's a lot of work going on in the brain. It's doing something. The question is, what the heck could the brain be doing? Because you're moving so well, here's an idea. Here are the frequencies. Beta's not on this particular chart, but you can get the beta. But I'd like you to note the far right column. And notice that indicates that endorphins are increased and steroids are decreased. And as you go even slower, you notice that even more of the endorphins, such as serotonin and melatonin, are increased, and there's even a greater decrease in steroids. The point here is that there's a dramatic increase in yin in the parasympathetic response and a de-emphasization of the sympathetic response. Something I think is really interesting, that when you get into delta, you start to produce growth hormones, and it stimulates the immune system. So a lot of people feel that it's in the theta and delta ranges of sleep that you produce, that you go into a healing state. And I think we all have experienced that, where you didn't feel very, very good. You had a cold or something, a headache, and you went to sleep, and when you woke up, you felt better. So healing takes place in deep sleep. You can also quickly realize that if someone isn't sleeping properly, having disrupted sleep, they may, in fact, be doing some damage to their health if this goes on for a prolonged period of time. So here's another chart connecting the chakras. I know we haven't talked about chakras specifically, but I believe most people are aware that in Eastern, particularly in India, there's the understanding that we have nerve plexus, and these 7 plexuses are connected to colors, and they're connected to frequencies. Now, in the next chart, you see the same chakra centers, but you also now see the key organs and glands that they're connected with. So, for instance, in the heart chakra, the green circle, there's the thymus gland. Well, the thymus and heart work together, and there's been some great research done on the heart and mind connection. And one of the things I saw was that the thymus and the heart have a frequency that is in harmony. So these frequencies, perhaps there is a timing, there is an overall clock, kind of, where the brain triggers. For instance, what I'm suggesting here is that as the brain goes into these lower frequencies, it goes from beta into theta, the rest of the body hears that and makes the appropriate adjustment, so that it's almost automatic. You don't need a wire going from the brain to each gland. The glands know when the brain is going into sleep mode because of the frequency change. That's just I'll have to look around to see if there's any real research on that, but that's what I personally believe is happening. So when we meditate, we will be going through the stages of pre-sleep, going even deeper into theta, and it's possible in meditation to go into delta. And you're probably wondering, well, why in the heck would you want to do that? Well, we're going to pick this up in the next section on conscious change. If you go into these states consciously and you're awake, you're meditating, and the brainwaves slow down as if you were going to sleep, but you stay conscious, then you have a fantastic opportunity to be aware of what's going on in the body. This is called conscious healing. So just by being awake, as you go through these levels, you can not so much direct, because you don't want to be the director here. You want to be the observer, just like we did in the walking through the body exercise. But just being aware that you have anxiety will begin the process of cooling it and lowering it. Just being aware that there is some issue in the physical body will begin the process of healing. There's a nice feedback loop here. We're getting back into feedback. So as you consciously become aware of healing that needs to take place, if you're in these lower frequencies, there's a much better chance of beginning the healing process. So we're going to do our meditation, our detachment, specifically observing the body as an observer. And this gets back to the question earlier about how can I know my progress? Well, knowing the progress is hard because you're entering into new areas of experience. So to some extent, you have to trust that whatever you experience is going to be okay. So if you just let things be okay, and your body, your spirit, and your energy will heal and grow and make changes as necessary. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to do a single thing other than observe and watch the healing take place. So here we go. We'll do our detachment meditation now. Well, that's the